10 things you need to know about the TikTok Act. I'm Monica Perez, and this is today's Deep Dive. So today's diving platform, the headline that I keyed off of to do this show, is from a website called basedpolitics.com, which feels a little bit too obvious, but it was a good article. The TikTok bill is a Trojan horse. Prepare for the Patriot Acts for the internet. So the first thing you should know about the TikTok Act is that it is not about TikTok. I read the whole thing like 3 times. It isn't an act yet. It's really a bill. And man, that stuff is full of so much mumbo jumbo. Now I remember why I'm not a lawyer. It is so boring, so tedious. If it were any longer, I wouldn't have gotten through it. And you have to get through so much legal stuff and insidery language. It's like almost as bad, not quite as bad, but almost as bad as reading some of the like FDA approval, like authorization studies and data, like with all the jargon and everything. But the reason I looked at it, I must have pulled 10 articles, all of which are in the show notes, about what's wrong with this thing. It's called the Restrict Act. They introduced it in March. It was Mark Warner, one of my least favorite senators. I would say absolute least favorite, but I don't know enough about the rest of them. But I do not like him. So I read all these articles, and there's just a lot of politicking and people going back and forth and criticizing or supporting or whatever. So I wanted to know what was really in this thing. I mean, some of the things that people were saying is that it is the Digital Patriot Act, that it could ban VPNs or even Bitcoin, that it could hijack your Ring camera data. But the bigger picture is that it would interfere with your freedom of speech, that kind of stuff. And yes, I can see how reading into the incredibly broad and vague language in this act could lead one to believe that these things could happen. But I think the real problems with it are more obvious than that. And they're more fundamental. They're more procedural. It's more about not having recourse to defend yourself. It's more about not even knowing when you're in violation of the law. It's about putting a lot of power in the hands of the president and the Secretary of Commerce. Like, who knew that was going to be like potentially the most powerful cabinet position in the country, kind of like Department of Transportation. Sometimes I guess you look at what people they put in those positions to see what the value of that position is. So those two are more important than we thought previously, or more than I thought anyway. So it's a lot of that stuff that made me worried when I read this from a kind of legal perspective. And the other things that people are worried about, yes, I mean, I'm sure that there are potential issues, but they're potential issues. And I think that potential issues are like infinite. So I could not possibly list them all, but I will read some of the text from the act so that you can understand like what the specifics are, that it really is specifically targeting. A lot of people who listen to this show are a little more savvy in this digital age than I am. So you might want the raw material. I won't overdo it. Now, this act has been kind of out there for a couple of months, I guess, maybe 6 weeks. And I wanted to see if they were going to continue to debate it, make a big stink of it, how some of the stuff that's going on in the House is going to dovetail. This is something that came out of the Senate. And what I concluded, the reason I'm digging into it as it is, even though I cannot imagine this act standing up to any kind of constitutional scrutiny whatsoever, but I'm also not totally confident that we have like legit constitutional scrutiny anyway. So I'm not sure this is going to be the actual one, but it's like CISPA and SOPA. Those were these, the Congress kept pushing these. It was basically about surveillance and censorship on the internet. And when they could not push it through, they just started doing things through the back door. They started having false flags, or I consider them false flags, major mass casualty events, or so they were reported, that stemmed from the dangers of Facebook freedom, or whatever the stuff that CISPA and SOPA were trying to curtail, were like ostensibly trying to curtail, but really it was all about surveillance and censorship. But they just could not pass the laws as they were, but they kind of piecemeal put everything in place as false flags happened. So I'm looking at this act to say, okay, this is what they want. Do I think they're going to pass the act? Maybe, but I'm not counting on that. But I think that they will get all of this stuff accomplished. And that's why I think it's important. And will they get it accomplished through a massive cyber attack? Maybe. Will it be some horrible incident? I don't know. Would it be like a bunch of like one after another things that just finally move public opinion towards wanting something like this? Another, it could be another perfect storm where a bunch of little things happen all at once and you're like, ugh. I mean, they say it's about controlling TikTok, but it's absolutely doesn't seem to be about that at all. And as a matter of fact, the things that we all hate about TikTok aren't addressed in the slightest bit. And I feel like this, I don't know if it was TikTok or some of this investigative stuff, these issues were on the table. They say it's about foreign adversaries having software, having applications, having assets, digital assets in the United States that make US citizens vulnerable to having their privacy hacked, to government officials having surveillance, that it presents national security issues because it's backdoor to data and patterns and all of this. But it doesn't seem to me that it even is necessarily about foreign adversaries. Like, I don't even think it's like that. I don't think it's about TikTok. I don't think it's about that. I do think it's about like complete control over every aspect of the internet. But that's not even the thing that I find to be the most dangerous about this act. So let me just tell you kind of like what I got out of it, and then we can dig into some details. So it starts out that the sentence that tells you what it's supposed to be doing: to authorize the Secretary of Commerce to review and prohibit certain transactions between persons in the United States and foreign adversaries and for other purposes. So this is the Secretary of Commerce is Gina Raimondo, who I was like, oh, she was the governor of Rhode Island. She's just like a New England local or something. Oh, no. No. I looked at her wiki page and she's a triple threat. She is a Harvard undergrad. Not that there's anything wrong with that. She went to Yale Law School, starting to get a little fishy. And she's a Rhodes Scholar. So you have Oxford, Harvard, and Yale checking all the boxes. It's Yale Law School. She's a Rhodes Scholar. And she worked at Bain Capital, whatever. I feel like I had her at Rhodes Scholar. So she's in this position and she gets an incredible amount of power through this act. So what she's supposed to do as soon as, like within 180 days of this thing being passed, is she's supposed to go out of her way to assess and recommend for prohibition or mitigation certain transactions. So this is basically creating massive investigations across the internet and all that implies without probable cause. So it's just a priori, whatever. Like, it's just going in there. And so it's not like, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, you won't be attacked. They're going in with these investigations, and the investigations are where I think, if I were to crack the code on this, I would say it's the investigations as well as the power this gives Gina Raimondo and Biden and their successors. Those two things are where I think is the most serious issues here. So the people and transactions that are targeted are anything that has more than 1 million users, annual active users, and is owned by a foreign adversary or is controlled within the jurisdiction of a foreign adversary. It is being investigated to see if there's an unacceptable risk to national security or to U.S. persons, in which case the Commerce Secretary has the sole responsibility, sole authority to recommend to the president that this is a risk. So that is, she has the power of the stovepipe. And that immediately was like, who is going to be controlling her? Because we learned a long time ago from Colonel House to FDR in a wheelchair that it's the person who controls access to the president. And what he thinks and acts on is where the real power is. And this chick is not the center of that power. Someone is going to influence her. So once she recommends what should be prohibited or mitigated, quote, which could include just divesting these assets, So the mitigation, the president could just demand that any assets that are owned or controlled by a foreign adversary conducting business in the US that falls under this category, very broad category, needs to sell. Which, of course, makes me think that on one level, this is just either an economic power grab to make monopolies, secure the monopoly or duopoly of certain organizations. So like when Trump was trying to ban TikTok, which was actually kind of like more like a ban of TikTok, which this doesn't even mention TikTok. One of the possible mitigating factors, like without a total ban, it wasn't really a ban of TikTok, it was a ban on doing business with TikTok. So if they can't make any money, they're obviously not going to be here. Don't operate in China, by the way, which is funny because it's a Chinese company. It's owned by ByteDance, which is a Chinese company. And they don't operate there. So I assume that they're making most of their money here. And if you can't transact with them, they're not going to do it here. But one of the things that we're going to do to mitigate was allow Oracle, which that guy is such an insider, let Oracle control all the data that TikTok produces so that they can't bring it back to China. That's another code crack on this one. A lot of people like AOC and others are saying, a lot of people, like this could, again, be the real Trojan horse is like, scrap this thing and just make an internet privacy bill that protects children and your data. And I've talked about this before on a previous deep dive. It seems to me very clear that big tech, big, like Facebook and Google have done a lot of things that want to encourage this idea that we own our own data. So what I think that's about is not so much us owning our own data, and I think we're the dumb money, like they could get it away from us. It's to alienate it from smaller companies where they are, from the products that they sell, they are gathering data, and that has a lot of value. It has a lot of value to them, especially only if it's proprietary, only if they know something their competitors don't. Some businesses, the data, I think many, if not most, that have big data, the data is what is so valuable. So this seems like a backdoor into that. So there's a lot of things that they can do. And the problem with that, in addition, so the president has the sole discretion to mitigate or to demand action here. So Raimondo has this power. Biden has the power to actually take action. And it's in the hands, I think it could be both Raimondo or Biden, but there's very little leeway. Maybe I'll find it and read it to you on who is determined to be a foreign adversary. Not only who's put on the list, but who's taken off the list. And to me, those powers being so limited, like what's a bad transaction, what's the remedy, who is a foreign adversary and who isn't a foreign adversary, that is so ripe for corruption to me because it's so centralized that I think is one of the major issues here. If you take the power of identifying a foreign adversary or not, that's something you can peddle. Biden can say, and we've all seen like some of this insider stuff. I think we have anyway. Bob Ulinsky, who is kind of a whistleblower on this, and other things that have come out about the Bidens, they do the pay to play thing. So you can use this and say, I will, you're going to go on that list, or I can get you off that list. That's a very classic thing, especially with the Chinese. We've seen before, they seem to overpay people who they think have political influence and access. And boy, will this prove that these guys have that kind of power. Whereas normally it's just, oh yeah, my dad will do you favors. And if he does, then you get paid. And if he doesn't, it's like, oh, sorry, he couldn't do it. You know what I mean? It's like an old scam. This actually in writing shows that they have the power. But the other thing that is so powerful here is the investigation. The investigation that Raimondo would undertake 180 days after this is passed, so without probable cause, is so comprehensive that in itself might be the goal here, because that will reveal so much information, so much data. So depending on who they share this with, whom they share it with, depending, they will have, even if they never prosecute anyone, even if they never have a mitigating situation, never have a ban on anything, the information that they will have in their possession, and I'll read to you what it will entail, that in itself, information is power. Knowledge is power. That in itself is huge. And then the thing that I worry about the most here is there's a laundry list of all the things that this act requires or prohibits or whatever. And it says if you interfere in any way with these investigations, with the purpose of this act, with any mitigating thing in this act, if you do anything wrong, you can be subject to massive civil and criminal penalties. I wonder if this is what people are talking about with the VPN, possible VPN or Bitcoin, is that it's inherently secret. And by being anonymous and secretive and intending to be that in itself will, if there's any foreign entity, any Chinese, I mean, it gets to the point where I feel like anything that's like made in China, hardware or software, can bust you, can make you in violation. Like, and I wonder if you could violate this without even knowing and be subject to civil penalties for each violation by a person of any of this act or any regulation, order, direction, mitigation measure, prohibition, or other authorization issued under this act. For each violation, a fine of not more than $250,000 or an amount that is twice the value of the transaction that is the basis of the violation, whichever is greater. And then the criminal penalties are if a person who willfully commits, willfully attempts to commit, or willfully conspires to commit, or aids or abets in the commission of an unlawful act as described in this act. But the unlawful act is where I'm kind of confused. It's like, I'm not even sure you need to know what you're doing. Like, you might not even need mens rea. You might not even be able to know. In which case, and the problem there is not that everybody's all of a sudden going to be a criminal. But if they choose to prosecute you for some political reason, they can use this because maybe everybody would be in violation of it one way or another. And that's the same thing as who's a foreign adversary. When they can pick and choose, that's why I hate anti-corruption initiatives. It's that they pick and choose, and that gives them so much power. But the criminal stuff is you can be fined up to $1 million or imprisoned for up to 20 years or both. Then there's a whole section about civil forfeiture, asset forfeiture, and I believe it actually references some bill or act. And when I looked that up, that act, I think Chapter 46 of Title 18, referenced some like drug stuff. And I know the asset forfeiture under the drug laws don't require a conviction, and there's very little recourse there. And that is what brings me to like kind of the last thing that makes me crazy is that, and it's the worst thing, the thing that's scariest is that, yes, you might violate these laws, be subject to those penalties, but the recourse is extremely limited. There's like almost no due process. What they said you had to do, this, and I'm reading this myself, it was in some of the articles, but it's hard to believe you don't read it yourself. The only recourse, no matter where you live, no matter where the alleged infraction took place, the only recourse is through the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and it must be strictly based on an argument against the constitutionality of the issue at hand, which is really hard to do. Like, there are a lot of laws that have been written by Congress that in themselves have been adjudicated or not adjudicated for constitutionality, but that clarify what is considered constitutional or unconstitutional. I mean, these are checks and balances. And so for an individual to have a constitutional case in front of the DC District Court, it seems almost impossible. It feels like a complete, and this is why I think it would fail on constitutional grounds. And to make it so much worse, throughout this document, throughout this act, over and over again, it exempts the prosecution of this act from many, many statutory limits on government action. A lot of the accountability, transparency, it just goes through, and it just throughout says this shall not be FOIA. The Freedom of Information Act was the most recognizable example of there's no Freedom of Information Act. So there's no transparency at all. They don't even have to make up an excuse. And it reminds me of like the vaccine thing where if it's free from liability, then you really have no recourse there. It's just a carte blanche to do things wrong. And whether you trust the people who are writing this to be well-intentioned, which I definitely do not, what they're looking at is a moral hazard. It's because there's no transparency. If you know that you're not going to get caught, if there aren't any consequences, you would not believe how quickly people devolve into bad behavior. And I'm telling you, you can tell when I've told this story before. I'm not going to get into it, but when I see people making anonymous comments, like on a blog post of mine or whatever, versus comments that they have their name attached to, so that's consequences, right? That's accountability, transparency. The tone is totally different. I mean, I think that we're like, so close to descending into complete chaos. So I remember an erudite friend of mine or acquaintance of mine in school said to me, and I don't know if it was true or not, but it was stuck in my mind, that like the greatest contribution that Greeks made to human civilization was to transfer the control of our behavior from shame to guilt. I don't know why she was attributing that to Greece. She might have been a classics major, so I'm not going to dispute it. I've never verified it, but regardless, the point is shame means the outside world needs to keep you in your place, and you fear that. Guilt is when you keep yourself in place. And there's absolutely, and I think that we're still basically operating in a world of shame, especially the more you get atheistic. Maybe we're just going backwards. But without accountability and transparency, you get bad behavior. People, if there's no consequences in the here and now, people will not behave. So those are the things that I find to be like really shocking about this. So I'm going to read some of this act a little bit, but I'm also going to say, I basically never use TikTok, but I hate it. I hate it. I see what it does to people. So I had 3 kids in high school during lockdown. So they were locked down. I used to really try to move away from screens with my kids, to limit it. And once they were on screens for a year and a half all day long for school, I just didn't have it in me to tell them that they couldn't relax on the screens. It was a terrible time. But I felt like TikTok was basically the worst thing that I would say for girls, it was the worst. It made me think video games are not so bad, because I think of it not as the alternative to video games. I think of it as the alternative to porn. I'm under the impression, I actually do not know this. This is not something that's been, I haven't been aware of any kind of porn issues among boys, but I think TikTok is in my world, but I think TikTok is the flip side of porn. I think for girls, porn would be being the object. You know what I mean? So if they have these girls who are coming into their own sexually, they want to look sexual. They want to look like sexual objects. They're not fantasizing about conquering, they want to be the objects of the fantasy. I really think that is a big part of the draw for TikTok that is appealing. However, the only time I've ever really seen it, I've seen my daughter's feed, is it's so crazy. It's like kittens and bunnies, she's like, oh, look at these cute kittens. Look at this. She has bunnies. Look at the bunny thing. It's so cute. And I'll be looking through, she'll be showing me different things. And I saw once a picture of a woman who looked like my daughter. And she was holding up a picture, and she was super happy in a cafe with a big smile on her face. And she was holding up a sign that said, I'm 30, I have no kids, and I'm happy. Something like that. And then there'd be more kittens and bunnies and, how to make an ice cream sundae. And then one gal in a workout outfit, black gal, saying, trying to explain why overturning Roe will kill teenage girls, something like that. So she was an attractive person you really wanted to be friends with, and then she's telling you this, with a smile. Then there's how to put on eyeliner and then more of that political stuff. So I never look at it. And I asked my daughter, she's older now, but she was still using it. And I said, look, instead of an allowance, I'm just going to pay you to not have TikTok on your phone. Maybe that's not like the best parenting approach. Maybe that's not by the book, but I don't care. Like, I needed it to work, and it did work, and I'm happy. So I asked her before the show what she likes or does not like what are the best and worst things about TikTok. And now I don't know if right at this moment she's dipping back into it. I'm not sure. She's been away. I could probably follow up. But anyway, so this is what she wrote to me in a very disjointed way, but I'm still going to read it to you. She said it was okay that I read it to you. She said, and I only asked her if I could read it after she told me. So she didn't craft this for y'all, but this is what she told me. She said, I learned things I never would have any other way. I learned them on TikTok. Interesting things. That's like the only plus. The cons are it's extremely emotionally volatile. One second you're watching kitties, and the next you're watching a mother grieve her child who committed suicide. And when I say grieve, I mean I've seen security footage of ambulances wheeling a body out of a house on a stretcher. It also shortens the attention span. I am absolutely certain of that. She says it promotes body positivity, which I really like, but it also promotes eating disorders and unhealthy comparisons. I mean, that's just as old as Weight Watchers commercials next to McDonald's commercials on TV. She said the cons outweigh the good 1,000,000%. She said, now this is where you can tell I would never use this expression, but she would say it's also not regulated. And there are people seeking sex on that app. People seeking sex on that app, posting really provocative things. Meanwhile, 5-year-olds are also using that app. I did not know that. She said, I think her generation, is exposed to sex too young anyway. Almost every person I know saw porn for the first time sometime between the ages of 8 and 12. She said another pro is that it gives people outlets to express their identity. Gay people, people from different cultures, autistic people who don't normally see others struggle with the same things they struggle with can on TikTok, which can be helpful, but definitely doesn't make up for the rest of what's bad about it. Also, they listen to you more than any other app, and it's actually bone chilling. You could be talking about something extremely niche with your friend, and your phones are turned off. You mention it once, never again, but still the next day, a TikTok with your words verbatim pops up on your feed. It's actually scary. And that is interesting. That is interesting because I see stuff like that and I'm like, could it be? Could it be? Or is that a coincidence? Could it be? And she obviously knows it is. And I think that's interesting. And it's weird to me, I mean, that I don't have the mental brain capacity to watch it. It's like a train wreck. I don't want to watch a train wreck. I don't want to see blood. I can't let TikTok go across my face. So I am totally insulated from what these young people are seeing. So I think that's interesting. Anyway, so, I went through what I think was important about this act. So let me read you just the wiki blurb of the Restrict Act. It says, the Restrict Act is described as a systematic framework for addressing technology-based threats to the security and safety of Americans. It grants the Secretary of Commerce the authority to review transactions by certain foreign entities who offer information and communications, technologies, products, or services in order to identify, investigate, and mitigate undue and unacceptable risks to the national security of the United States or its citizens. This includes, but is not limited to, impact to the country's critical infrastructure and digital economy, sabotage or subversion of ICTS in the United States. ICTS is the Information and Communications Technologies. Interference and manipulation of federal elections. Undermining the democratic process to steer policy and regulatory decisions in favor of the strategic objectives of foreign adversaries to the detriment of the national security of the United States. But I want to go back to the manipulation of foreign elections. One thing that I was reminded of as I was reading this act, when it talked about interfering, is that, and this we've talked about before too, that just suggesting that the November 2020 election be investigated, or recounted or any of actually using the legal means to pursue that was interfered with in itself by the Department of Justice. Like that was considered some kind of terrorism or whatever. Like that was, so when they say interfering with federal elections is what it's trying to prevent, and just securing federal elections or having some accountability to the people on federal elections is in itself considered this kind of a threat, that embedded in here, that also could be just the sole purpose for this whole thing, haystacked and the rest of it. Anyway, it says the act applies to ICTS entities that are held in whole or in part by or otherwise fall under the jurisdiction of a country or government that is designated under the act as a foreign adversary of the United States and has more than 1 million active users or units sold in the United States. The initial text of the act classifies China, Hong Kong, Macau, Cuba, Iran, Russia, and Venezuela as foreign adversaries. And Mark Warner, who's a piece of crap, says that he acts like that's it, but it's not it. It's absolutely fluid, open-ended list. It says it would be unlawful for any person to violate any order or mitigation measure issued under the Restrict Act with civil penalties of up to $250,000 or twice the value of the transaction that served as the basis of the order, whichever is greater, and criminal penalties of up to $1 million and up to 20 years in prison. So I think I did a pretty good job. That seems like what I came up with. And they did a good job too, I guess. I'm not reading on. I'm sure it gets all political. But I did want to read. So it says that a foreign government or regime is determined by the secretary to have engaged in a long-term pattern or serious instances of conduct significantly adverse to the national security of the United States or the security and safety of the United States persons, and includes, unless removed by the secretary, and then it lists all those countries that the wiki overview I just read to you lists. But it's obviously completely open-ended, and that's where all of her power, a lot of the power comes. It goes on to say all those things that it just said in the wiki thing, but it's also open-ended. Like the actual acts that are a problem are open-ended. And even within it, the acts like interfere with the federal election. That stuff is vague. It's vague. Okay, so here's what I wanted to read to you. So Raimundo is supposed to start investigating this stuff like 180 days after the act is passed. And the act further says she should prioritize the following. It says, priority information and communications technology areas. In carrying out sections 3 and 4, the secretary shall prioritize the evaluation of 1, information and communications technology products or services used in a sector designated as critical infrastructure. And that's where the act actually refers to the USA Patriot Act. So people weren't kidding when they started drawing those kind of parallels. The 2, software, hardware, or any other product or service integral to telecommunications products and services, including wireless local area networks, satellite operations and control, wireline access points, core networking systems, long, short, and backhaul networks, or edge computer platforms. Any software, hardware, or any other product or service integral to data hosting or computing services that uses, processes, or retains or is expected to use, process, or retain sensitive personal data with respect to greater than 1 million persons, including internet hosting services, cloud-based or distributed computing and data storage, machine learning, predictive analytics, et cetera, managed services, content delivery, internet or network-enabled sensors, webcams, endpoint surveillance or monitoring devices, modems, and home network, et cetera, that have more than 1 million persons used. So, I'm wondering if that does mean Ring cameras. And is it just if the Ring cameras, what if the parts are made in China? That has been the target of some of this CFIUS or whatever. It's like the latest House Un-American Activities Committee. It's the Congressional Oversight of Foreign Investments. But they've talked about just actual physical pieces of hardware being potential spy bots or whatever. So can they confiscate your Ring camera? Drones, unmanned vehicles, desktop apps, payment apps, web-based apps, information and communication technology products integral to AI and machine learning, quantum key distribution, quantum communications. Remember I had those shows about Taiwan and those high-end semiconductors that are really just being banned based on ones that will lead to like really sophisticated AI. Seems like that's in there. Computational biology, e-commerce technology and services, yada, yada. So all of that is critical function. Any of that being compromised could fall under the category of critical infrastructure, especially because there are cascade effects of it. And because the foreign adversary thing is vague and open-ended and includes both foreign operations in this country or operations in this country that are influenced by foreign entities abroad, like it's amazing. So even if they don't do anything to enforce it, the fact that they are going to investigate all that stuff. And then if you don't cooperate with it, then you're in big trouble. Like the thing is, it's just draconian. So I never use that word. I hate that word, but whatever. So I'm going to put it in the show notes. I highly recommend that you read that for yourself. And let me see if I think I probably went through the entire top 10. I'll do it quickly. All right. So what are my top 10 things that you should know and I guess hate about this? Broad latitude and who is or is not considered a foreign adversary. That's a moral hazard and it's too broad. 2, the Commerce Secretary has the exclusive right to make a recommendation to the president, so she has the power of the stovepipe. Hate that. Came from Mark Warner, who is a complete grifter in my opinion. He is the second richest man in Congress, and the way that he always says that he got his money because he was a financial guy, but the way he got the grub stake for the financial thing was when he was in government and he was tipped off by a DNC donor of the value of cellular licenses. So the FCC was not selling them. They were auctioning them off or giving them out by lottery. And a lot of people were putting their names in the hat to get these lotteries and having no intention to operate a cellular network just to resell them later for like a lot of money. So he didn't get the lottery. He didn't put his name in the lottery, but he organized consortia of license holders, people who won the lottery, and he packaged them up for sale, got a percentage of the sale, and also got a piece of the action. And that's how he got so much money. And that was extremely, in my opinion, unethical for a government insider. That practice, the lotteries, came under serious scrutiny, was discontinued, if I recall correctly. But this guy, when he gets on his moral high horse, I would never trust him. And it really pisses me off. Okay. 4, broad latitude on what activities it bans and what it can demand as a mitigating factor, including it can force divestiture, which in my mind, again, major moral hazard. They can broker deals for their friends. They can force divestiture, and that would probably benefit friends of theirs. Does it really ban TikTok? It does. If it eliminates ByteDance and TikTok, Musk or somebody else is just going to reestablish it. They're already trying to compete with it here. They just can't because TikTok is too well established and too good at it. But all the things that we absolutely hate about TikTok, absolutely hate, as Kara Frederick of the Heritage Foundation says in a very histrionic way, that data exploitation, privacy abuses, influence operations, and promotion of social contagions leave Americans vulnerable to the CCP, the Communist Party of China. They're not vulnerable to the Communist Party of China. They're vulnerable to big tech in the US. It's not going to change that at all. And even if that meme catches on, then they'll just give us some other legislation that also won't solve that problem. It's just, it's just too valuable to keep us mentally ill. So they're not getting rid of that. Yes, number 6 was this could just usher in as a reaction a Privacy Act, which makes your data your property, but really just alienates it from the little guy and further increases the oligopoly in big tech. This is a big one. This is a very big one. It could foster retaliation. But in any case, even if it doesn't foster retaliation, even if it just takes away the foreign operations and gives it to American operations, that could further that bipolar world that I was, kind of ruminating on over the past year or so. That they're, I know people talk about a multipolar world. I know it was briefly a unipolar world, like just the U.S. or everybody. But I can't help but think that one thing they might be trying to do again is kind of put down another iron curtain, give Russia and China the East, and put up barriers because maybe we can't compete with them. I've gone through that theory before, but this would definitely foster that. It would definitely support a kind of bipolar world, at least as far as putting up fences between economic competition from them. Number 8, any attempt to interfere with the act could result in draconian, twice in one day, civil and criminal penalties. And I wonder if a VPN will fit this bill. That's super scary. Very little recourse, no due process. The only appeal is to the DC Circuit and only with a constitutional argument. And the players in this are all pretty sus. I hate Mark Warner, Gina Raimondo, obviously triple threat with the Rhodes and the Harvard and the Yale Law School. And all the people who signed off on the bill were not my favorite as far as the lawmakers go. So for me, obviously, I hate what's scary about this. When Trump wanted to ban TikTok, I kept wondering, what's the catch here? Because I will say that one of the few things that tempts me away from my libertarian extremism is culturally and mentally, the screens are just so, so, so bad for our kids. It's just intolerable. It's just awful. And this is the worst of it. I mean, I almost you know what? If they would just ban TikTok and everything like TikTok, I don't know. But actually, no, it always comes back to whenever I get tempted to violate my libertarian instincts, it always comes back to, I actually think that in a free market, this wouldn't be a problem. And I've told this before, and it's, it haunts me. I tried many, many times, really did research, really put my mind to it. It's one of the few times I actually really, really, really tried to do something that should be achievable and failed to do it. And that was I tried to curate YouTube videos and otherwise kind of curate the internet for my kids. And I was told by an organization that was trying to do the same thing that YouTube just doesn't allow it. I don't know if it blocks it or what. And I would say it's possible that they use copyright laws or proprietary stuff to keep their stranglehold on this kind of media and make sure that we cannot curate it ourselves to our liking. I don't know the ins and outs of that, but I'm not a fan of patent law and copyright law. And I know that a lot of this stuff rests on that. And maybe we would have a free competitive world where, yeah, like Rand Paul says and other libertarians, if you don't like TikTok, don't use it. I totally agree. But we've gotten to the point, with the COVID policy, that people are forced on the screens all the time. It's just basically impossible to function as an economic being. So we're forced to abandon our way of life and, go out in the wilderness. You know what I'm saying? It's getting too much. But I would say probably rather than layering on more and more regulations, probably if you knew how to tear down some of the pillars of policy and government that keeps this stuff afloat, it would probably be fine. But that is perhaps the topic of another deep dive. Perhaps it's the topic of somebody who actually is in that field. Anybody who wants to come on the show, I'm absolutely delighted to have you. You can email me at monicaperezshow@gmail.com. I wanted to just give a couple of shout outs. One is I was at the store. So I bought this house. We bought this house, as my husband would say. He bought this house. And it's not a fixer-upper at all. It's a very nice house. But it's super old. And let's just say it needs a lot of work. Not a fixer-upper, just needs a lot of work. That's how I'm phrasing it. So I was at the lumber store and a gal started talking to me. And for a second, I thought she worked there because she called me by my name and I had just placed an order. She said, "Are you Monica Perez?" And I said, "Oh, yes. Are you here to help me?" And she said, "No, I'm just a fan of your show. And I recognized your voice." I mean, I was blown away. I was so blown away. I mean, plus I actually think it's mathematically impossible for me to have, I think that's happened to me once before, for me to even be in the same room, in the random of the people listen in this country. You get some, whatever, X thousands of listeners, and to actually run into one in like Pasadena is pretty unusual. Anyway, I was super flattered though, and complimented that she said hi. It was so nice to see her. Her name is Lacey. So shout out to Lacey. Thanks for saying hi. It really made my day, week, month even. And I also want to shout out True Hemp Science, who I just love more and more the CBD products. And he sent me a little care package. I love I do not get paid to advertise for him. He sends me care packages every once in a while, and I love them. And I don't trust any other CBD brand. And it absolutely, as the immortal words of the testimonial I've read before, I always thought CBD was bullshit. It's kind of like celiac disease or gluten problems. I always thought it was bullshit until it happened to me. But it is absolutely not. And people online were asking because it so improves my sleep. And people were asking online, what is the best product for sleep? And True Hemp said number 81 is great for sleep. I personally, Monica Perez, like the 25 milligram gummies. But there's many, many products. You can call them. They will help you. And if you buy $100 worth, which in my opinion is well worth it, and it's probably how much you need to like get into the groove and realize that it doesn't alter your mind, but it does kind of help cut the anxiety, help you sleep. Like it takes maybe a couple of weeks to like really feel that. But if you use the promo code Deep Dives, you will get a $25 oil, which is the same. The CBD oil totally works, and just for dropping my name. So check it out. Ever see that show? Check it out. Very funny. Very funny. Check it out. Anyway, I am Monica Perez. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it on social media, or if it's someone you think would also enjoy it, you can feel free to tweet at me at Monica Perez Show. And what you might find if you tweet at me and check out my feed there, how often I am flagged. I was actually flagged. I tweeted this today. I was flagged. I tweeted, working on a deep dive on the Restrict Act for tomorrow, reading tweets on the show. And I tweeted an article, a Yahoo article, that said how the Restrict Act could block access to TikTok and other platforms. Twitter, thank you, Uncle Elon, flagged it and said, we have put a warning on this tweet because it might have sensitive content. Well, needless to say, I did not get very many responses to that tweet because my guess is absolutely nobody saw it. But if you go to my feed, you can see what I say. And I also have a great Instagram of at Monica Perez Show where it's just much more personal. So you can check that out. And you can also check out my videos on rockfin.com/deep dives. And also I live stream on YouTube every once in a while. And there's always a nice, fun little crowd in the chat there. Anyway, so missed you all. It's been a while since I had a deep dive, but I'll keep them coming even despite the move, just maybe not quite so often. And if you think you're missing some, if you're just listening to the Propaganda Report feed, you probably are missing some. So check it out on Deep Dives with Monica Perez, where you will get pretty much everything, as well as the opportunity to get the feed commercial free for just $5 a month.